to bring back our friend Hendrika de Vries. Her first novel, When a Toy Dog became a wolf, and The Moon Broke Curfew, did so very, very well. It shows she's a force to be reckoned with. And now we're looking forward to her talking about Open Turns. But to give her a proper introduction, I'd like to introduce her son, Grant Oliphant.
All right, so this is a little bit like gilding the lily to be introducing Hendrika to all of you, but it is a real treat. When my mom first started talking to me about writing a memoir, she was very hesitant. She had received a lot of encouragement and guidance from some of you in this room, which was great, but she needed to be put over the top in terms of feeling like it was worthwhile. And what I knew as her son was all my life, my mother has been the most phenomenal storyteller, and that she's had this gift for bringing alive the life she's had and also the things she's thought about. And so, of course, I probably would have said, yeah, it's a good idea regardless, because she's my mom. But I absolutely said it with enthusiasm because of what I knew about her and the life she had led. Now, one of the things you learn when your parent writes a memoir is there are things you didn't know. And those are interesting. Those alone are worth reading the book for. As many of you know, this is her second memoir, and what I know about my mother is that her life has been weirdly and beautifully and strangely resonant with some of the things that are going on in our society right now. And it is a gift and a beautiful thing for somebody to be able to look at their life and draw out from it lessons and ideas and inspiration that the rest of us can find hope and joy from. And I think my mother has a unique gift for being able to do that. So I'm going to hand it over to my mother.
Hey, I did good. And it's very timely because he is a bona fide Aussie. He was actually born down under. And he makes a tiny cameo appearance in this book. And I do want to thank you, Grant, for coming up. He drove up with his beautiful wife, Aradna, my most amazing daughter-in-law, who's taking photos.
Who says she would have fallen in love with me a lot sooner if I still had the Aussie accent.
So, and thank you all for being here. You're all honorary Aussies today. There's a real Aussie, Murray. Actually, Murray over there, his wife passed away a few years ago, but she was very instrumental in helping me rediscover Aussie terms when I was writing the book, and I do mention her in the back of the book. So she's present, even though she's not physically present. And all of you, thank you for being here. I had nightmares in the last few days that my son would drive up and with Aradna and there'd be no one here. So first of all, also, I've got some little kangaroo key rings, and after I've talked, you're all welcome to get a little kangaroo key ring and be honorary Aussie today. So, first of all, and I'm going to use notes because I'm old and I can't remember things. That's my excuse. But anyway, writing a memoir is a little bit like living two lives at once. And it's really weird. It's like, here I am, 17 years old. I've just been chosen to represent South Australia in the Australian National Swimming Championships. And here I am, 70 years later, scared silly, and I really want to hide because basically I'm an introvert. So these two it's very strange to be juggling that. Also, this book was much harder to write than the first memoir, and I'll talk about that a little more later on. It was surprising to me. So anyway, originally, because I like to hide, I wanted to have a cover with me swimming the butterfly stroke, where my face was hidden and you could just see the top of my head. And Anne Shaw, my friend who's standing there, she knows that very well because she and I were exploring pictures for the cover. But no, the publisher decided she wanted this one, and I did learn that you don't argue with the publisher. So there we are. So let me just say something about open turns. Now, as many of you may know, it is a swimming term, and you're probably all familiar with the flip turn that people make when they're swimming freestyle. But I was a 10-year-old in Amsterdam when I started swimming competitively, and I swam breaststroke. And breaststroke legally requires an open turn. It's called an open turn, where you touch the wall with both hands firmly, tuck your legs under, twist, and push off with strength and smoothness. And as you know, if you've watched the Olympics on TV, or watched swimmers, or are a swimmer yourself, a turn can make a tremendous difference in the outcome of an event. But you know what? Turns are not just particular to swimmers. I was a therapist for over 30 years before I retired, and I saw people dealing with turns in their lives. Deaths, divorces, physical ailments. And perhaps we're all dealing with it a little bit today with the situation in the world. How do we deal with those turns? Well, put your hands firmly on the wall, tuck your legs under, and push up. So anyway, I learned early in my life that the way we handle the turns in our lives becomes part of the narrative of who we are and how we pass on strength and resilience to those around us. And I want to tell you just a little tiny backstory about my Dutch grandma, who lived in a beautiful big home with family heirlooms in a historic neighborhood in Rotterdam. Now, I was 2 years old when Hitler bombed Rotterdam and destroyed the whole historic city. And my little grandma, she was a small woman, escaped with her life and just a pair of favorite slippers. Years after the war, I asked her, Oma, because I called her Oma, what was that like for you? You lost everything. Your home, the beautiful family belongings, your neighborhood, the familiar neighborhood. And she looked at me and she said, well, darling, at least that nasty Herr Hitler did not get my favorite slippers, and my feet were warm and cozy. The women in my family do not believe in being victims. And if you've read my first book, you know that. I tell the story of my mother in my first book, when a toy dog became a wolf and the moon broke curfew. My mother was a tremendously courageous woman who resisted the Nazis, joined the resistance, hid a Jewish girl in our home when my dad was a POW in a German labor camp. She was a chip of her mother's, the old block. She was like her mother. And I end that memoir with the family's decision to migrate to Australia several years after the war. I was 13 years old, and that was probably in hindsight, the biggest turning point in my life. Now that memoir was an amazing success. It really surprised me. It won a slew of awards. And then my friends and readers, and many of you here, started plaguing me for a sequel. I thought I was done. You know, I wrote the book. Come on. Oh, what happened when you went to Australia? Did you ever go to the Olympics? What was it like for your parents to be immigrants? When are you going to write that story? Okay. But I thought, how can a story about a teenage immigrant girl in Australia in the 1950s be of any interest to anyone today? And then I started thinking about the themes. Loss, adjusting to a major change, finding strength when the whole world has changed around you. What sustains us? What do we believe in when everything we thought was familiar is suddenly swept away? And I realized that this wasn't just my narrative. This is all our narratives when we're faced with changes. And life inevitably brings changes. Like I said, look at today, we're all facing some changes. So anyway, with those thoughts, Open Terms was conceived. Now, since the first book ended with us leaving Holland, this book begins with being on board the ship, a large migrant ship, sailing to Australia. I was 13 years old. We celebrated New Year's Eve, turning from 1950 to 1951 on board the ship. A boatload of people with empty pockets and hearts full of hope, my mother liked to say. Like I said, the women in our family did not believe in being victims. However, when we landed in Australia, that first year, I really had a hard time not to feel like a victim. We lived in the bush. There were no girls my age. There was no swimming pool, and high school was by correspondence lessons. I dreamt every night of escaping back to Amsterdam, to be with my friends, to be in my pool, to be at my school. Until one evening, my dad, who believed that nature was a grand cathedral, took me for a walk in the bush. We walked in the dark, and he pointed up to the sky and pointed to the Southern Cross. And then we walked further to a grove of eucalyptus bush in the silence of the scrub desert, where there was not a sound. And in that stillness, he helped me hear the voice of that ancient land. Yes, I did hear the dreaming land speak. And to this day, it gives me goosebumps. And I remember that experience. Later in life, when I became a therapist and interested in Carl Jung studies, it would lead me to explore indigenous healing practices. However, when we moved to the city a year later, I immediately jumped into that swimming pool. I had discovered that Australians love sports, and they really like people who are good at them. And hey, I was a good swimmer. So that's kind of the entry into the Australian sports. Let me see, I have to see what else I want to say about that. Oh yeah, a little background. It was very strange. When I was on land, I would be struggling. I'd be struggling with adapting to the culture. I'd be trying to suppress the memories I had. I mean, I was a traumatized child in World War II, so, and these memories would not be understood by any of my Australian friends. They just didn't have the same experiences. But the minute I dove into the water, everything ebbed away. I would find a sense of calm, a sense of strength, and I had a community. Because what was really interesting, even though there were quite a few immigrants after a while who joined swimming clubs, was we were all swimmers. All the differences fell away. And if you want to read a really beautiful book about that, read Bonnie Tsu's book, Why We Swim. She really writes about the mystique of water and swimming and how it does erase differences. I highly recommend her book. So, I intended to be a champion. My mother had taught me that intentions are like prayers, and if you pay attention, they'll come back as destiny. So, I intended to be a champion. Why not? She taught me I had a part in how I was going to create my destiny. Now, my mother, of course, was a powerful role model. And as I already said, you know, during World War II, there she was, standing up to the Nazis, holding a gun at her head. And, you know, she left that legacy. But, in addition, she was also a race walker champion and runner as a young woman in Holland. So, you know, quite a role model. She was my rock. But I think what's important to look at here, since this is a book about an immigrant girl, is the challenge to family dynamics when families migrate. My dad spoke several languages, and I had inherited his ease with languages. So I spoke English. I'd already studied it in high school, and I spoke it pretty quickly because I had that ease. My little sister, who went to elementary school, learned English. So my dad and I started conversing in English. My mother had a really hard time learning the language. She tried, but it was very hard for her. So here she was, my rock, and suddenly I became her interpreter. And remember, I was a teenager. I was testing my power and my independence. So you can imagine the impact on the mother-daughter relationship. And this, I think, I saw this when I was a family therapist, of course, is something that we don't study enough about migrant families. The change in the family dynamics that happen, you know, and that they struggle with. And really what we know is that at the core, it's the migrants who have the highest degree of resilience. And I know you all got migrants in your background because we're a nation of migrants. So we have a lot of resilience here today. So anyway, here I am, this teenager, you know, testing my power with my mom, and I write about that in the book. I have one story, but I'll let you read it. It's too funny. Anyway, so my father, who I'm conversing with in English, he liked and admired strong women. He married and loved my mother, right? So he said of his teenage daughter with a smile, "Well, she's feisty." And my mother would say, "She's willful." So then I come to, how do I let that girl have a voice as I'm writing? When I wrote the first book, it was the voice of a little girl who is suffering, experiencing horrible violence and hatred caused by adults. Who couldn't love a little girl like that? Who couldn't love giving her a voice in your story? This one was a little harder. She's a teenager. She's an immigrant. And she's very introspective, as many immigrants tend to be because our roots lie elsewhere. She's an athlete. So she's totally preoccupied with her body, the strengths, the limitations. And she's a young girl growing into womanhood in the 1950s. So she's dealing with misogyny and a 1950s view of a woman's place in the world. There were times when I would sit there and she would tell her story, and I would say, really? You really want me to put that down? You really want me to share that? I would feel so vulnerable. I'd feel exposed. And I'd go again. Oh, I'd get away from the computer and struggle. God, should I really put that out there? You know, this is her story, but oh my gosh, that's, you know, we really don't need to share all that. And then I'd listen to her voice. And she'd say, it's my story. It's my experience. In English? It's my truth. You cannot silence me. And I'd remember that speaking our truth is an act of activist resistance. It's what my mother used to tell me, it's what my grandmother used to model to me, and it's what one of my favorite psychiatrists, Robert J. Lifton, writes in his book, Surviving Our Catastrophes, which, by the way, is another little book. You should ask Michael to get that for you. Speaking our truth is an act of activist resistance. We may not all be able to march. We may not always be able to join groups that we feel can be part of the resistance, but we can speak our truth. So, I wrote her story, and I wrote her truth. After all, activist resistance runs in our female blood. I think Carlin likes to say it's the Dutch in me. So today, finally, to end this, today when I look at that girl, at that cover of that girl standing on the edge of the pool, full of strength, intention, and hope, I realize that there are turning points in our life, moments that we don't fully understand till many, many years later. And how important it is for us to go back and touch base with those moments, with those stories. And this book is made up of those moments. So I hope you'll enjoy it, and I thank you for listening.